I'll let you all introduce yourselves, talk about, what you do and your favorite hobby outside work. So Art, you go first.
Yeah. Hello, I'm Arturo Silva. Been with the Post for about 4 years now. Been in the field for about 10 plus years. Feels like longer. Favorite thing outside of work is to hang out with my dog and take photos around the hood. Yeah. Let's see who's next.
Hey y'all, I'm Vanessa. I'm joining live from Boston, where I'm also a Post alum and now at a small nonprofit newsroom that reports on gender and politics. Outside of work, my number one passion is hunting like good vintage furniture finds. My favorite score is a 70s modular couch, which is my most beloved possession.
Awesome. Hey, everyone. My name is Mark Figueredo. I run design ops practice for our retirement plan services at T. Rowe Price. I've been at the company for almost 10 years now, which is pretty amazing. And outside of work, I am an avid bullet journaler. So I love analog pens, fountain pens, notebooks, stationery. It's a passion.
And hey, I'm Michaela Weaver. I'm a principal product designer at Eventbrite. I've been at Eventbrite for 3 years now. I'm based in Los Angeles, and I'm also a faculty at the University of Southern California teaching design at the School of Engineering. So love the intersection of those two things. And when I'm not doing that sort of stuff, I'm mostly taking care of my pets and my plants, and you might see them intermittently in the background. There are lots.
Hey everyone, my name is Jan Braga. I'm here from Amsterdam. I work at Chromatic, a company that maintains Storybook, and I'm Storybook maintainer. Outside of work, I do calisthenics. I really like it, but also origami. I actually have a model of my dogs over here, which I keep on my desk. Yeah, so anything about development, Storybook, visual regression testing, and stuff like that, I'm the person to talk to.
Awesome. We'll jump right into the first question. So I'll ask this to Jan, you first. What do you appreciate about working closely with designers and developers? And on the flip side, what do you like least about it? So I guess for you, this is a question about designers.
Yeah, I mean, I've worked with, before I joined Chromatic, I work in many different kind of application development companies and stuff like that, which there were always designers to collaborate with. And the thing I like the most is that synergy. I think it's like, normally developers are more technical, designers are more creative, and sometimes you have like a more shallow vision on things. So when you collaborate, this synergy brings the best of both worlds. And I think that makes you see things better. It's really nice because you always learn something new. And I think this creativity, which spurs from the collaboration, is really nice. And I think it's not so great when it comes to like translating technical difficulties. Like sometimes you have a designer in your team which is incredibly novel, like they're looking to the latest trends and like animations and stuff like that, but maybe they don't know exactly how hard it is to implement, and they think it's super easy, and therefore like the business analysts and other people are like, yes, let's do it, it won't only take a week. But turns out it's like 3 months long kind of project, right? So that's something difficult to balance. But I think as much as you collaborate with each other, you get to know more about like, how real things are, and then it's easier.
Right. And, if you haven't noticed already, we've kind of got designers and developers both on this panel. So it's kind of exciting, I guess, a little spicy to hear like both sides of it. So hopefully everyone is still friendly after this. Vanessa, you're kind of on the opposite side of Jan, right? You're a designer. So I guess same question to you, but from your perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm a designer, but the agency where I started my career really treated every designer as essentially the front-end developer on their projects. So I honestly feel like I'm coming late in the game of this idea that they're really like separate fields, separate jobs. And I think as we'll talk later today, we'll learn like, should they be? So I've always enjoyed from the very beginning, like such deep collaboration and the respect for each other's expertise. I think in the way designers can be really skilled at exploring so many different ways of solving like one particular user problem. Developers are like just love hearing people talk out all the different ways we could implement one specific solution. They're both such like generative and exploratory conversations that I think we can build on each other as well. And so where any least comes into it, I think is when anyone is just not as open to that exploration or curiosity. Speaking from my experience as a CS grad, there were people that were really quick to say like, that won't work, we can't do it, we have to do it this way. And I honestly think that answer is the opening point of a conversation of like, okay, why not? And knowing just enough about the other's industry will really equip you with the language of like, okay, what should we tweak about this implementation to make it work? Or like, what should we change about this approach to make it happen?
Right. That makes a lot of sense. Art, wanted to pass this to you.
Yeah, I can speak to it. As a developer, I appreciate it. I think, at least in the last 4 years at the Post here, I've had a great opportunity working with a designer who's we're able to build a mutual trust between us, where there's a bit of a lot of respect there, where we both know like we're both skilled at the job, we both know how to do it, and come with an open mind to new designs. So like Vanessa was saying, like be open to it, and it's more like improv, I guess. Like yes, and we can do this. Maybe we could try that instead. I think I found that to be incredibly powerful for building the relationship. And yeah, I think one of the least things I like about, I guess, that partnership between designer and developers is the handoff. Is I wish we both use the same tools. Like as a background as a web designer years ago, as a freelance web designer, I used Photoshop and I was able to like code all that out eventually. But I don't know. I wish that we're all in the same tool. I guess easier for everyone.
That would be ideal. And I think something that I like that kind of you all touched on is how you kind of have to almost embrace like just that it's going to be like this, like there's going to be some synergy that you need to like welcome, and that like collaboration is never like seamless, but just kind of owning up to that and being like understanding on both sides. I think Vanessa, you touched on that well. So we'll dive a little deeper like into kind of what makes designer developer collaboration so challenging. Is it being in different tools like Art mentioned? Is it competing work styles, bad processes, something else?
Yeah, I'll take the beginning of that one because I always look at it as kind of like a family relationship with the design and developers. And I look at it from a standpoint of like, you're almost like, in many cases, you're not on the same team. Usually they're either different teams that you're working with, which means that you have different bosses and they have different priorities for you. So I always look at that family dynamic of like, these parents, and they're like, okay, well, you're my children, right? And we have things in this household that we are paying attention to and that are important for you to focus on. And then you have the other household that's like, cool, same thing for us, but a different perspective. And like, the kids are trying to play, we're trying to have a good time, we're trying to get stuff done, right? But sometimes the parents have different thoughts on what they want for their kids. And so it's like, you have to listen to your parents, right? So if your boss is telling you, hey, I want you to focus over here and get these things done, and specifically in the design developer space, right? I notice this a lot with our developers. It's like, okay, you have story points that you have to hit. We're trying to, do this much work this week. So I can't have you go to a 2-hour workshop with the designers because it's really important for you to be doing this. However, from the design side, we're saying, please come. Like, we want your ideas. We want your input. We want you to see this early. And so you're trying to find ways to still like make that relationship work while still not making your parents mad. It's kind of how I always like to look at it.
Yeah, +1 to that. I definitely relate to everything you're saying, Mark, about having or finding the shared goals amongst the separate goals, because there usually is some common ground always in that conversation and talking to each other to find where there can be, oh, okay, so you're trying to increase performance and I'm worried about accessibility. So let's meet in the middle and maybe we can do this. And that's a lot of, I'm leading design system efforts at Eventbrite. That's a lot of what we're always trying to do is, okay, where's the common ground if leadership has maybe different priorities or not quite the same ones. I also love to like just putting yourself out there, asking the dumb question in a big room of people, or prefacing this might not be the right way to say this, or another technique I was just using this morning in a tokens architecture discussion is, can I repeat back what you just explained to me to verify that we have the same understanding of this, because I'm not maybe as technical in the room with others. It's opening yourself up and just being humble about what you know and what you don't know sometimes, right?
Yeah, I'm such a huge proponent of the dumb questions. And I find that every time I go out on a limb to ask one, so many else like join in, and it's an opportunity for other people to voice up, like, I wasn't sure either, or like, oh yeah, like maybe we had a different take on this. Honestly, even asking them toward the end of a project, you'll find out something that you thought everyone was aligned on this whole time, and that one question makes you realize, hey, we had a different take on this. So a big fan of those.
If I can add to that, I think for me, the most important thing is also having a shared dialogue or vocabulary, let's say. Talking about dialogue, like as a developer, there's like the term dialogue for the things that pop up on the screen, but then some people say pop-up, some people say modal. Like it's very difficult to be aligned if for the very fundamental, we're actually not aligned, even in like when calling components. So when the designers, they do a lot of stuff in design land, let's say on Zeplin or Figma or any other tool, they call things in certain ways. And then when the developers start implementing, they call something else. So later in the stage, when discussing about what they're doing, they start talking about different things, but they mean the same. So I think it's like aligning is the most important thing.
Right. And you guys, all talked about like open communication. So this question kind of, I guess, lends to that, kind of opening up about what you wish the other side knew about your workflow. Are there, talking about being open right now, are there any misconceptions that you want to debunk?
Yeah, I could take a first pass at that. I think the biggest thing for me is just being abreast of changes in tooling that can drastically change the workflow, and also just drastically change the rate at which we work, especially with AI augmented workflows rolling out and things like that, right? Everyone tends to like get stuck, like any human, in their way of doing things, and changing that, especially one of my jobs is trying to change the way designers work at times. And that's not a comfortable thing. It's not a comfortable thing to be like, well, I've always done icons like this. Why wouldn't we just keep doing like that? So I think like everyone trying to stay more up to date with like what tooling's out there that can like facilitate this designer developer handoff and collaboration. Because I've seen designers that just assume they think this is good enough because that's the way they've always done it, and just not be aware of maybe new developments or better ways, or just ask the question. And I've seen engineers that are like, I don't even need the handoff materials. You can just send the typeface or send me the hex codes, right? And it's like, whoa, no, please don't do that. So, those are extreme examples, but there's so much capacity nowadays for tooling to like augment processes in a way that helps, that I think part of that is like staying really in touch with that and asking questions. How can I use this better? How can I work faster, more efficiently, and be a better collaborator?
I think it's also important to think about how things are moving in both worlds. So in the front end side of things, let's say there's a lot of component focus rather than page nowadays. So some people call it shift left design, I think. So essentially, instead of people just getting an entire page and they want to build the thing, and then they get another page and then build the thing again, they start trying to extract things into components. And there's also this trend coming in design land, and I really love that, because then it basically makes that both people are thinking the same. And I think that helps so much. So if whoever is already designing something, just thinking about the bigger picture, you really need to make sure to like create a component library and make sure that things are aligned properly and like match with each other, so that the developers, they can like just get the pieces and build like Lego, instead of having to think so hard about it. I think that helps a lot.
Yeah, I think there's also, we talked a lot about just like that communication, and I think those opportunities really come in those kind of almost I talked about before, like these opportunities to come together, so that the first time that we're really meeting isn't just in like a handoff, right? And we should really be meeting ahead of times. And I think what's really important is, you know, the ability and kind of that permission to come in even earlier to the process. You know, I kind of mentioned before this idea of, you know, being too busy or whatever that is. But I think that when you're actually working together, and this is something that I feel like should come top down, is that permission to be a part of that process. And I think very much to what we've talked about already, that's a great opportunity to share that common language. So as you're working through a project together, you can identify and say, this is a pop-up. Oh, I call it a modal. Cool. What are we going to call it as a part of this partnership? And then that way it just starts to build on those relationships. And I think something too that's just missing is understanding what is happening in those processes, right? Because a lot of the times they are separate. So when design is going through early research and discovery, there's a purpose to that. It's not just for fun, right? I mean, it is fun to do, but it's not just for that. We're trying to figure something out. And especially when we move into more visual designs, wireframes, whatever they might be, are there more efficiencies that we could find that maybe a developer could bring to the table? Like you're saying, Jan, like, hey, we already have a component for that. So, you know, when we do handoff later on, you don't have to do, you know, tech specs on that. We actually already have that. Here's its name. And then the teams can start to make these communication links, essentially, to be like, okay, awesome. We don't have to worry about that. That exists. Let's be more efficient here. Let's spend the time we would have spent there on something else and just work better together. So I think there's just so many opportunities earlier on for us to chat to essentially do exactly what we're just talking about here, which is create the common communication language and just figure out better ways to work together.
I don't know if this has happened to you, Mark, but raise your hand if you ever had this situation where you built a component, but it was already built by another team. We just didn't know it existed. It actually happened to me where I was doing a demo. During the demo, another team which was going to demo their components later after me, they demoed the exact same thing. And it was so embarrassing.
Yeah, there's so much lost efficiency, I feel like, with that, but it almost kind of goes back to that like family, you know, community model, right? Is like every team has a different household, right? So it's like you have this other household of developers that are doing a thing, but they're not talking to their neighbors. And we should be talking to our neighbors to share those types of things and figure those things out. And it's super frustrating. And I think also too, from a design side, when you see other teams that are building these components or these experiences, and you're like, well, wait a second, why were they able to do that? We were told that we couldn't do something like that. And then we're sitting here like, well, y'all aren't talking? Because if you did, like, that could have been figured out before. We could have done that instead of putting it in a day two, never happens situation, and could have just done better work together. So I think there's even communication within the teams themselves that needs to happen, whether it's design or developers, right? Like, we just got to get better at this to be better together.
Communication is a big theme, the theme of the day so far, for sure.
Yeah.
And you also mentioned a lot about workflows. So we'll speak a little more on that. We actually did a study with Design Ops Assembly about the most kind of inefficient parts of designer to developer collaboration. And it highlights specific workflow problem areas, design documentation, organization, and design system adoption. So the question I wanted to ask to you all, Vanessa, we can start with you, is do any of these resonate with you in particular? And if so, can you share more about how your team has tackled it and kind of what's made a difference for you?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think even the very premise of design delivery is something that my team has always been focused on. How can we improve? How can we experiment? And our latest take has been kind of blowing up that concept entirely. And so I think what we would normally think about as what the design handoff to development, like the passing of the files and other people getting started, separate rooms, separate computers. We've really tried to like shorten what that looks like. And when a design feels ready enough to get into development, I, as a designer, start pair programming with our developer on it. So we're together live in Zoom, like tweaking the final implementation, like trying a different type style, like changing the placement this way. And I think that's really helped with a bunch of the different results that came up in that survey. One of our biggest ones even being QA and spotting inconsistencies, because we're essentially QAing the product as we're building it together. And so we're not having that step of redlining, or like the moment when the design looks nothing, or the implementation looks nothing like the design. We're really discussing that throughout the process. And so it's not the perfect fit for every time we work together, but it's been a really fun way to explore how we could improve that process.
Right. Talking about like more, I guess, less of like a throwing it over the wall type thing when you get to the development stage, and more of like a kind of more of a collaborative effort. That's kind of also the premise of like, you know, why we build Zeplin, is not having your developers blind until they build, and then in contrast having your designers blind once they throw like the design over the wall type of thing, right? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, one thing I can add, you mentioned about Zeppelin. I don't know if everybody here knows, but Zeppelin is building a product called Omelette, which basically helps people maintain component libraries. You know, it helps basically detect a lot of data on usage for the component libraries. So yes, like Iran says, communication is the key. As designers, we can try to keep them informed, but in big teams, we need more help, right? So there's so many pieces at play. We have designers, we have developers that focus on building component libraries. Maybe a big company needs that kind of team. And then we have the developers that use those component library components to build the actual application. But then if you only have the designer and developers, and you don't have this like component library pillar, it's quite difficult to actually get people to use them, because, you know, maybe they're not so well thought when the components are built, because when people build them, they're thinking about the specific page or a specific feature they're building. They're not thinking about reusability or other things like that. So I think this this thing about having a proper, you know, protocol in place, having things to actually look out for, and be data driven as well. So you know what people are doing, what they're using, and whether people are even using or not the things you're building. It's really important.
Yeah, I think to play on that a bit, I think at the Post we've developed this new process, at least internally for the design system team, which we call a component sprint, where we come as a team together on some ideas. Let's say it's go back to the idea of a modal versus dialogue. You decide, well, we want to build a modal, but we have different ideas about how to go about it. So let's spend the next 2 weeks like iterating on this. It's similar to a design sprint, but it's called a component sprint. So each counterpart, designer, developer, work together in a fig jam to play around with ideas, get inspiration, and eventually get to a point where they're able to, like, you know, go off on their own for a bit and iterate on those ideas, what they've agreed on, and eventually the output of that is a prototype that they both feel good about. I think that's what we're trying to do to improve the handoff, improve like the inconsistencies between components and design development. But we've also found it to be helpful for like even training new engineers, new designers in the org. As they come on board on the design team, they spend like, I'm not sure, like it's been a quarter maybe, or maybe 3 months or 4 months on the design system team working with us and getting those best practices, that training up on how to, you know, build with our components, build and build with design system thinking, because it is like a skill. It's a skill. You can't just like expect anyone to come on board like, I want to use, well, can you use the design system, please? Like, well, they want to, but they just don't know how to, or they don't know how to have that hat on. So we found like training is helpful, and workshops is helpful.
Yeah, that sounds like a dream, to be able to bring people into the team for like a more immersive design system, like outreach and education. We kind of do something similar, but it's much briefer at Eventbrite, where it's like we try to partner with pilot teams in different feature areas and be like, okay, what is, you know, how is the design system not serving you at this time? What adjustments could we make, or where could it expand, and things like that. But absolutely, like +1 to what Jan said about like a data-informed approach. That's huge. We've used Omelette before as well, and it was great for not just showing adoption, but also the additional signals of the where is adoption happening? Is it on this feature team, in this repo, and not at all in this area? And so where do we need to do that outreach? Where do we need to partner for a component sprint? Or at Eventbrite, we call them more jam sessions, because our design system's Marmalade. But yeah, no, I think really everything on that survey resonates, especially how no one said that no parts need improvement. That was my favorite thing that I didn't notice originally. 0%.
Yeah, one of the things that we talked a lot about, like design systems and things like that. And I think even when they exist, sometimes you can find other inefficiencies. I know for our team specifically, we've been struggling a lot in that QC space. So we've done the design handoff, right? We use Zeplin with our team, right? So we've annotated, we've created flows, we've done a lot that we've overcome early on that didn't exist to better help that communication. But what we're seeing is still having a lot of inefficiencies and things incorrect in QC, with zero communication that's happening kind of once we hand off and work along with them. We talked, I think, in a previous thing about like a handshake instead of a handoff. There should still be communication, but that doesn't always happen. And it's very aggravating, I guess, or like stressful for the design team who has spent a lot of time preparing that, doing a lot of that work, putting it into Zeppelin, annotating, to have it come back and someone say, well, I didn't know that was there. We're like, well, we've done training. We have the videos, we have these things, or, oh, I didn't know that. And you're just, there's a part of you, and it's hard not to get real mad or angry and be like, do you see what you developed? Do you see what we put in here? That doesn't look anything alike. Like, you don't want to talk to someone that way, but there's also a level, I feel like, where you're like, but we've done a lot of this up front. And, having those examples, and the problem that we come against also is then our development teams are saying, hey, well, can you put that into a deck? Like, can you show us the specific areas or examples where you're seeing these issues? And then the design team is taking days to then capture those, annotate those again, right? And then deliver them back. And that's just taking so much time. So for our teams, that's a really big area of inefficiencies that we're trying to overcome. But I feel like there's just only so much you can do, because it's just kind of making everyone mad. And then me as the design, ops guy, I'm like, how can I make everyone happy? Where are inefficiencies? Like, how can I help us communicate better together? And sometimes you feel a little bit lost in it, I guess. So it's always looking for good ideas.
Yeah, I want to real quick, thank you for all the omelet love. That was great. And I want to talk, Mark, you mentioned Zeplin briefly. I know you've been using Zeplin for a long time in your design ops practice. You've talked about how valuable it is both on the design ops practice side as well as the design to dev collaboration at T. Rowe Price. So I was interested if you could share, a little bit more for those who aren't as familiar with Zeplin about how it's helped beyond just specs, like more big picture, structure, organization, and alignment.
Yeah, I think our biggest thing, our teams are using Figma to design, and well before, dev mode or anything existed, our teams were trying to find the best ways to hand off, all right, or handshake, however we want to call it. So sometimes some teams would just have their developers in those files, and they would kind of redline the Figma file, right, and go through that, which had its pros and cons. We had some teams who were just exporting PDFs and then marking those PDFs up, to do kind of that same thing. So for our team, it's been super helpful because it's kind of streamlined a lot of that. Two things that have really popped out recently that we solved last year, which was a fantastic thing to do, was in that kind of handoff handshake part, the PAs and product owners were coming back and they were like, our devs are getting lost because we have a lot of scenarios that can happen inside of the fintech space, a lot of messages and disclaimers and all of those kind of things. And the flows feature was something that was really helpful. They were like, we just don't know where they go next. And we were like, oh, well, then we can start to connect these flows, right? So that way, as they're going through that experience that we've designed, they are actually going through kind of screen by screen through the actual flow, and then have all the other features that Zeplin has, right? With the annotation, with pulling specs, with pulling assets straight from those files. And I think when they really started to see that work, there was a lot of celebration. We haven't had as many issues there. Again, I say that, and at the same time, I just spoke previously about there still being issues. So there's like this weird translation part, perhaps, that's happening between like what's being provided, all that design can kind of do to make sure that it's in the most optimal space or optimal position so that the development team can move quickly and swiftly with that. So like, you can only do so much prep, I feel like, up front, have all those features there. So I think a lot of what we're coming up against is the idea of continuous training, and also realizing that sometimes these development teams or on a rotation, right? They're not always the same developers that you're working with, whether there's turnover, team switches, different allocations. So that's something that I'm working on right now, is how do we kind of create this library or a resource for the developers as they're getting up and running, onboarding almost with our design teams, so that they can just go through that, understand how things work without someone having to necessarily hold their hand. We're there if they need us. So that's a big thing we're trying to solve right now for ourselves, just to make the communication, the tooling a little bit better.
Right. And that's something, we've heard a lot about on the Zeplin, here at Zeplin as well, is kind of like you hinted at this, like devs getting lost sometimes, I think, in like Figma files. It's not like always, I think like there is something to be said for, having things all in one tool, but there is also on the same side, the opposite side of that coin, it's nice to have like some separation of like, for lack of a better phrase, church and state, when you're building out of two different areas, and two different, I guess, fields as well. And we could spend, probably all day, the rest of it today and tomorrow, talking about these workflow challenges. But it'd be great to uncover some like root causes together. So I'll ask this to Vanessa first. What do you think is most to blame for there being so many workflow inefficiencies between design and dev? Is it lack of effort or empathy, a process issue, a tooling issue?
Yeah, I mean, really following through this tools conversation that we're having, I think one of the biggest root causes could be each person on the team has a different source of truth for the product. So as a designer, I might think of my Figma file as the source of truth. This is what we're building. For the product managers, that might be the PRD or the requirements document. And that's the source of truth of what it should be built and what should be measured. And for engineers, the GitHub tickets or the code is the source of truth. And so you have all these questions of like, what's happening? Jan, I think we'll have a lot to say about how Storybook really helps with that process. But I think it really just underscores this theme of communication that we've been having, of that is really essential to connecting each of these different locations if they should exist in different locations in the first place. And while we live in this reality that we have, I think getting everyone on the team comfortable in each other's locations and where we're living like goes really far toward building empathy. So I train engineers on like, here's how to be in Figma, export the assets that you need, so I can return the favor and leave comments in GitHub and be in the places where they're looking.
Yeah, and I think something to understand about it, more those inefficiencies in MLA, is just the idea that I think we assume that the work is very different. But I think that by the time that we really start to come together, I think there's probably a lot more similarities that actually exist than differences, while the skill set might be a little bit different. And I didn't mention it earlier, but when we were all talking about being able to speak each other's language a little bit, I think that the more and more when we're coming together that we can start to do that and know, like, you are the expert here in this part, you design, you developer, but we should have a mutual understanding. And I think when it comes to that handshake, hand off perspective too, the design teams want to provide the developers with the most pristine, like detailed, everything that you could possibly need to go into development, because we want it to come out just as well, right? Like, we've spent time in the upfront designing this experience. We've done the research, we've done the user testing. We know what the users want, and then to do everything you can to prepare it for the teams to hand off, and then to have it come out on the other end. You're like, well, wait a second, what did we miss here, right? And I think that's where we see a lot of those inefficiencies. And so, like, trying to just uncover what's happening in that void, especially if your design and development teams are not talking once those are handed off or they're starting to be in development, I think is like what we have to uncover. We have to shed light on what's happening inside of that time so that we can both mutually respect what is happening during that process part of that, but also feel comfortable and confident to see what's going on. We're not asking you how are things going because we want you to move faster. We just want to make sure that you have the things that you need so that you can do your job. And so I think it's like finding those areas to communicate and like just do that. Just like get rid of anything that might exist, like past history, whatever else, and just be like, we are all here to do the same job. We all want the same thing, hopefully for our end user. Like, we need them to be happy. We need this to work. Well, this is our business that's at stake. Let's not fight or argue over like small details when at the end it can make a really big impact. But also let's have those conversations to understand whether or not there is an actual big impact to happen or to have versus just a want or a need, you know, like kind of figure those things out.
Jan, I saw you raised your hand. Did you want to jump in before Art goes?
Yeah, I just wanted to say one very obvious things. Developers are lazy. I cannot say that for designers.
Don't tell us that,
Jan.
We thought we were working with highly productive individuals.
So just take advantage of the laziness and make things easier, right? So if there are tools that can integrate one thing into the other and vice versa, then do that. So Storybook, for instance, for people who know about it, it actually has add-ons, so you can install extra things to, add extra functionality to Storybook. So developers might be developing their components in Storybook because they're lazy and they don't want to run the entire app. But then you can actually integrate Figma or Zeplin or any other tool into Storybook, so you can see the design right there. On the other side, there are also other plugins, like Zeplin actually has a really nice Storybook integration where the developers just publish stuff and then the designers get that directly in Zeplin. Figma also has integration. So if you make this easier, then it's difficult for people to miss, because the designers, as they're working on their stuff, they can actually see the live version of that thing, and they can easily say, this has nothing to do with the design I did. Why did they do like this, right? So the developers can also do the same thing on the other side. So, let's take advantage of the tools to make our lives easier.
I'm loving the chat right now.
Yeah.
I'm efficiently lazy. I value my time. I'm lazy.
Yeah. I think in my experience, it's a lot about tooling, setting expectations for everyone, but it's also like up at the leadership level where they want to nurture and create that culture where handoff is easier, because that creates efficiencies, like Jan was saying. So at least here at the Post, something that Brian on our design team worked with our management over on the design side is to use the design system as part of the yearly goals for designers. That's something that we adopted on the developer side as well. It's like, how are you being efficient? And efficiencies becoming like, use the design system or try to reuse what you have already there. So having that set up as goals and management helps a lot. Helps create that culture. I think it goes a really long way.
Yeah, shared sort of management goals that's a huge thing. I call it leadership signals value. If your leader cares about, gave the performance versus accessibility sort of example earlier. If two leaders that you are reporting into are not aligned and you're reporting to one, not the other, you have to have those conversations to figure out that middle ground again. Because it can affect the final outputs down to the pixels. Like, it's totally in the details that it all matters. And I think just thinking about like root cause and going back to that, like, I refer to myself sometimes at Eventbrite as a design system salesperson, not a principal designer, because that's a lot of my job, is just going between people and saying, okay, you want to have a shared library of components, but you don't want a design system because a design system's too much effort. So we'll do a shared library of components, and that's good. And language, whether it's a dialogue or a modal came up earlier, even when you're talking about it at the highest levels, language is really important to be like, okay, we have the same idea that we're applying enough effort to get to a shared library of components and not design system. And that's all we can do right now. So I think root cause is like having leadership aligned and then having that language that really crisply aligns everybody. And then it trickles down into like the final outputs.
I just want to mention just real quick, Michaela, I think I just wanted to kind of like plus one and maybe something for us to do too is like holding design and development leadership accountable for that shared and mutual respect. It's kind of what we were talking about before. If you're not getting that from the top down, then you yourself are not kind of being led in the right direction. So if a design, leader is saying, look, just get this to development, like they just need to get it done. bottom line. Doesn't matter if they like it or not. Like, that's not the right mentality I feel like to go into. Same thing with developers. If it's like, hey, if you think this thing could be done, but it's going to take a little bit longer, like, let's not cause more work for ourselves. Like, just tell them you can't do it. Like, that's just not the right model. I think that should be, you know, shown to our teams, because they really are trying to follow their leads at the end of the day, a good leader. And I think that's maybe a big difference too. So like, let's hold our top level leadership accountable for showing respect for both sides of the table, so that everyone else is seeing that and then can model that themselves, is probably a really important part of this too. It's not always the designers and the developers, the worker bees, getting that stuff done. A lot of the times it might be leadership that's actually kind of stirring the pot in the wrong direction.
Yeah, communication again, not just between the work, like you said, the worker bees, but also the leaders as well. So I want to pivot a little bit. You know, we've been talking about kind of what we don't like and what needs to change. That we can take like a more positive angle. You're all builders here. You're all familiar with requirements. So in your opinion, Mark, I'll let you take this one first. What are the requirements of a good design to development workflow?
Yeah. So I've mentioned a handful of times now, so not to beat the dead horse, but I think so that good communication as you're preparing things to be handed off between the two teams, utilizing your tool and making sure that everything is very clear and concise and understandable. You know, to Jan's point, if, you know, we've got the efficiently lazy developers in the house, right? We want things to be easy. So the design team should be doing their part to make sure that everything is easily understood. If there's interactions or any type of animations that need to happen that are not very clear, you know, create a small little example of what that looks like to help make it more clear. Whatever you have to do, I think is to get that in there. So that good development and design handoff really comes down to just good communication and ensuring that people know where things are, they can get to them, and they know what they should do and what they should look like. And then I think on the other side, if that's ever unclear for whatever reason, just ask the designer. They can answer you in seconds and clear that up versus waiting till, you know, weeks down the road or the next sprint where things are wrong. And then you have to redo your work. So if we want to be efficiently lazy, let's make sure that we're doing the right thing first. And then we don't have to come back to it again and cause extra pain. Just ask the question up front. Let's handle it in that moment versus next sprint.
Yeah, sort of playing on some of the things you said and adding to them maybe a different perspective. We're fully remote at Eventbrite, and you know, I'm based in LA. I work with engineers in Madrid and Barcelona, sometimes India, and they can't always like access me in the moment too if there's a question. And that's a really interesting dynamic to try to work through. And I don't know that anyone solved it. I think it comes up over and over again. What's remote good design to development workflow look like? And no one's got it down. So I want to kind of acknowledge that good's different depending on the size of your team, time zones. If you're at a startup, because I've also worked startup side, I've worked agency side. If you're at a startup and your desk is next to your developer, as it should be in a way, there's no excuse, right? Just have a dialogue, have easy communication. But when we're more remote or more scattered across time zones, sometimes it's really thorough documentation, once weekly check-ins where, you know, someone's up late, someone's getting up early. You have to be like agile and flexible based on sort of this different environment and different context you might find yourself in. The shared components are easy. You can always start from this library of shared components. Why we don't all have the same component libraries is because the people are all different and the contexts that we work in as far as the people and processes are different. And yeah, as much as possible, leaning on tooling when you're remote to supplement the communication when you can't always just like knock on their desk and say, right, "Can I interrupt you?"
Yeah, on the dev side, there's actually a question in the Q&A as well. So, all right, I'll ask this to you. This is specifically, you know, for you. How do you consider smooth handoff? Kind of the same question we've been talking about. How would you like to receive a handoff or handshake and be happy with what you're receiving?
I think others have talked about it a bit, but what I appreciate as a developer when I get the handoff from a designer is having it as clear as possible, the requirements there, having as supplemental documents there, having it annotated, like Mark was saying, even having like a kickoff meeting for me to review the design with you, so I can like, I don't think that makes sense to me, but can we clarify? Or so even they can like, you know, hey, here's a prototype I put together. Let's talk about that. I think that's what's really helpful for me. And ideal is like having regular check-ins, like, you know, a stand up every day if we're on a type turnaround on a project, or even like I think people were saying, maybe it's sometimes hard to like just you know, ping someone because they're different time zone. Maybe even like doing a recording, like we've done a lot of that, like record like, okay, well, I've tried this out. Even having your voice there as well, it's helpful. I think Slack makes it really, really easy to do that. To send off to them, like, okay, well, they'll see my recording at least. They'll get some context from my voice and what they can see on the screen. So I find that to be helpful a lot. It's just, you know, there's no wall. There's just like we're two people trying to get something done.
Right.
Multiple people trying to get something done, and it's just like we both want to execute it really well. So just open lines of communication.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you know, you're kind of leaning into this already, but I'll ask this next question to you first. What improvements are there that most teams could do to make like a positive step to improving designer to dev collaboration? And what do you think is a waste of time?
I think one thing I found really helpful is just having fun together at work, like taking those moments to breathe in between projects. And like, what we found really helpful is like the Fig Jam. It's like really fun to play with. There's a lot of cool gifts on there, a lot of cool stickers. Even have this thing you can like take a photo of yourself on the Fig Jam and like, you know, make funny faces on there. So I mean, it's like we're both people and we want to have fun and work together. And so I think that's really been helpful. Just, you know, building that mutual respect and trust. What I think is a waste of time, I don't know.
It doesn't have to be one. You don't have to answer that part if you can't.
I don't know. It's hard to say what's a waste of time, because any conversation you can have with someone will improve the relationship. So, yeah.
Yeah, total +1 on like having fun and remembering, like, at the end of the day, we're building things together. And so like one way to improve is to like build something fun together. I think in a couple past projects, we've tried out, like, I think as I mentioned earlier, not having like a super like final Figma before just jumping into the dev process together and figuring it out, asking the other what they think it should look like, getting feedback on like changes to make, even if it's not exactly the vision you had in your head. And just, it really helps underscore the belief that we're all on the same team. We're all building the same thing. We've got different skill sets that help us get there. But at the end of the day, like, it's not mom versus dad or favorite child versus the other. We're really all building toward the same thing. And in terms of a waste of time, you know, I think early in my career, I really felt insecure about like not understanding something on the first try. And so like spending a lot of time in a silo, like trying to figure something out, or like spending 4 hours trying to get my dev environment set up and being too embarrassed to ask like why I have all of these Git errors. And that's a waste of my time and my teammates' time. Like, that can be solved in a 15-minute Slack huddle. That's an opportunity to connect and learn more about the other. And so finding those opportunities to connect instead of like trying to figure it out yourself.
I love that answer, Vanessa. I think like echoing what Arturo and Vanessa said about having fun together is critical too. And like taking away that pressure. So it does feel safe to ask questions and not sit in a bunch of errors in your development environment or whatever it is. But I think I mentioned jam sessions already as part of our culture that we try to bring to design systems to make people want to engage with the design system. So we do those, we do unstructured time together, which gasp, like how could I possibly say that an agenda is a waste of time? But sometimes in the systems work, you don't know what you need to uncover together or talk about where there wasn't alignment or shared understanding. So sometimes you need that unstructured time, especially synchronously, because if you're async documenting, annotating this and that, you think everything's good until you talk talk. And you can put that in a fun context. We'll do things like draw comics together or name that component, kind of like name that Pokemon, but name that component to solve the dialogue versus modal issue. I got a bunch of weird, fun things that we do. But I think like the other thing, aside from agendas, that I think can be a waste of time to getting to better communication is like, I'll put designers on blast this time instead of calling engineers like lazy or something. But I think designers have this feeling that they can get to like pixel perfect annotations and I'm done, I'm good, and it'll turn out perfectly, but the job is not done as soon, right? Like it is not done there. And especially if you're in a rapidly changing context, let's say you're in the middle of a big project or a rebrand or any of those things, if you just leave the annotations there and then you don't update them or you don't rely on tooling to keep them up to date with designs, which Zeplin can help with, Figma can help with, right? Then they're actually counterproductive. So if sources of truth aren't kept up to date because we're not doing them in the most modern way we could, they're actually really dangerous and can be a waste of time.
Yeah, and I think one thing that we were going to talk about that I think in the interest of time, we're going to move a little away from, but this is also a question that we were asked in the Q&A. This is from Marina. And Vanessa, I'm going to ask this one to you. So how do you learn to collaborate with devs? I'm just a UI starting out, no experience, and would love to be the ideal helper and coworker with such an important part of the team.
First of all, the fact that you're asking that question is already a sign that you're going to be great as such a great collaborator. Because I really just like to get to the human level. Like there's not one secret of like, learn this trick and every developer will love you. Everyone's different. Everyone has their own personality that they bring to the job and to their workflow and how they work. I really like starting with the basics. Is someone a morning or an afternoon person? Do they love structured meetings, or like, are they good to vibe with something agendaless, like Michaela suggested? Asking preferences, even in terms of like, do you like being synchronous in a meeting and can you come to a good solution then? Or do you need some time away to gather your thoughts before committing to a solution? So really understanding the lines of communication, how they like to work, but not like finding where that might overlap with your own ways of working, and then where you want to stretch and challenge yourself a little bit. Because if two people are not willing to compromise, you're probably not going to come to a great end solution. So find the times when you can lean more on their preferences and try out how that feels for you to change up how your working style or changing your working style. And then try other opportunities where like a developer will try out the way that you work and you're getting that like shared empathy along the way. And then I want to pass it to Michaela, who has an awesome response to this process.
Oh, yeah. No, I think it's everyone like humbling themselves, right? And whether you're early career, mid-career, or an expert in your area, not being afraid to be wrong or to change the way you work, that adaptability with tooling and different things we talked about. Because ultimately software changes and you might fall in love with what you've designed or what you've built, and then tomorrow it's different. Nothing we make is ours, right? So, drop your ego about it, about the outputs, about the way you work, because people won't remember the actual work due to the rapidly changing environment, but they will remember whether they want to work with you again, because you're a great communicator, because you're adaptable, because you're kind. So that's key, is just being flexible and no egos.
Mark, I want to ask you this next question, actually. This is the top voted question currently. How do you deal with pushback from designers or developers? Just curious. And I'll let Art and then Jan go if you guys have thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, so I think the best part about it is just having that conversation up front and then coming to an understanding on whether or not you want to die on that hill. I use that term a lot. Like, is this the hill that you want to die on? There are going to be some features, I think, that designers or anyone together is trying to put into an experience that we know is going to be impactful. So I always take it back to like the data and the research. If this is something that we know is going to make the experience better, I will die on that hill. My designers will die on that hill because we know that in the long run, it's going to have a better impact. And so I think that the best thing you can do is use the data that exists, your research, whatever that might be, to have that conversation. Don't just get pissed and like slam down your computer because you didn't get what you want. If it's worth it, then let's use the information that we have to fight for what we believe is right. And I would say it's the same thing on the development side as well. If you have an idea or something that's going to make it better, then let's understand and have that conversation of what that might look like, even if it looks different than the design. Everyone has great ideas. It's like, but speak up and let's share those. I think it's probably the most important thing in any decision in your entire career. If it's not something that you think is right, well, then you have to use information, data, research, whatever it is to prove your point. Not everyone's just going to take your word on it. So I think that's probably the best way to push back, especially if it's something that you are passionate about and you think is going to be best for the end user.
Yeah, Art, any thoughts dealing with pushback from designers or developers?
Yeah, I think it's reframe it as like, it's not, we're very, both parties are passionate about what they want to do, what they want to achieve. But I think it's about making trade-offs for the time and resources at hand for the particular project. Like, okay, well, I'm not sure we can get that done. In like, for example, I'm not sure we can get that done in MVP, but maybe we can get that done later on in a different iteration. It's like, I think what we use here at the post is like agree to disagree to a point. Like, I know I want to say pick your battles, but yeah, that's essentially what it is. It's like, is this what I want to really push on? And it helps a bit to have a bit of empathy with that conversation. Like, well, they're clearly very passionate about this, and if I help them out here, maybe they'll help me out later on when I need their help to push back on something. So it's about respecting each other, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, if I can add to that, a lot of people, they have retro meetings in their companies. A lot of the times people are mostly talking about the things that they're negative towards, like, oh, what didn't go well, right? You barely have time at the end to say what went good, right? So one of the exercises I always like to do in different companies I've been to is to start with kind of like an icebreaker for gratitude. So I know if you can do it in person, I would definitely say, so you bring a lot of candies and then you distribute the candies to different people. And then the exercise is, okay, for each candy you have, you're going to give to someone in the table and you're going to tell them why you're grateful for something, right? So thank you so much, Elliot, for organizing this great event. Here's a candy for you. And then, you do the exercise as well. I think these kind of things, they make people feel closer to each other. And also not only think about these conflicts that keep on happening all the time. And then when you do end up having a conflict, I think people are more empathetic towards the other side. I think it's really, really nice experiment. So give it a try.
That's awesome. And I think we're at time. So I want to thank, first of all, thank all of you for taking the time to be here with me today. Had a great conversation. I hope you enjoyed it. To the audience, thank you. Excuse me. Thank you for coming and taking your time to be here. A recording will be emailed to everyone. So we'll follow up, check your emails for that. Any questions that we weren't able to answer, I'll follow up with the panelists and try to get some of their answers. And you'll have a follow-up with that as well. So again, thank you for taking the time. I hope everyone had a good, healthy talk, a little bit spicy, found out a little bit about developers and designers. So yeah, everyone have a great day, and I'll leave you all with this video from this fun little video from Zeplin, kind of how we see collaboration sometimes. So thanks, everyone.
Oh, and hey, the designs are ready. I just sent you the link. Did you get it?
Oh, I gotta go do something.
Did you get it? Oh, hey, did you get... Hey, did you... Finally! Did you get the Zeplin link I sent you?
Oh, it's a Zeppelin link? You just said that. I got it.
Not good.
Zeplin, because your developer deserves better.
You were in the bathroom for quite a while.